Previously, we talked about the ear and how it works as our receptors for balance and hearing. Let's talk about the eye, which is vision, the major sense probably in humans. Uh, this is what the front of the eye looks like right here. Uh, the iris, which we all know is the colored portion. Pupil, which actually we learned is really just a hole. You're really looking into the back of the eye there. And sclera, the white of their eyes. What you see of the eye is actually a very, very small portion of the eye. So the entire eye actually starts from here and then goes backwards in both directions to form a ball, which fits into the orbital socket. So imagine these layers of the eye, which are then going all the way around in a 3D fashion. So let's take a look at a side view of the eye, what it actually looks like. See if we can make this a little bigger so we can see it nicely. And so what you had just seen before was the front of the eye. And there are actually three layers of the eye, and they all extend 360 degrees around the eye, and they become different as they go. So let's look at the inner layer or outer layer, depending on how you look at it. So the one that you touch right here is the first layer here. The first part of it here is actually invisible. It's the cornea. You cannot see it. Think of it as kind of a glass covering. And it doesn't have any blood in it because it needs to be clear as light comes in, right? You don't want it to be refracted at all. And the cornea then extends and becomes the sclera. So it goes around. So we were only able to see maybe, that part of the eye right there. But you can see that the sclera extends all the way around the entire eye. And it just kind of acts as, a protective coating or connective tissue there. So the part we're really most interested in is the front of the eye, the cornea there. Okay, let's go to a different color here. I think I may have, no I didn't. So down here, so we just did the first layer, which is the fibrous tunic or tunica, and you got the cornea and the sclera there. Okay, let's go back to the eye. Let's choose another color here. And now let's look at the second layer of the eye. Now the second layer of the eye here is the interesting one. That's the one that kind of has the nerves and the blood vessel. And it doesn't really start in the front of the eye, or what we would call the anterior of the eye. And let's take a look. So now you've got this part here. This is the colored part, the iris. Now the iris is actually not just to tighten light with the color, but it actually acts as sort of a muscle. So it can constrict and it can dilate, and this causes the pupil, which is really just this space in between here, to become larger or smaller as it goes along. And it's actually attached to some muscles on the side here which help it, and those are called ciliary bodies. And then the layer extends all the way around in a coat we call the choroid, Let's take a look here. So that was the vascular tunica. Vascular because it has blood vessels and nerves in there. Most of it is behind the eye is the choroid, but we have the ciliary bodies, the iris, and then of course you have the most interesting part in the front there, which is the lens, and that's this big guy. And it really is almost like a rock. Later on we'll do a sheep dissection, you can see it. And this guy also can, it's a little flexible, it can stretch and it can get a little thinner. So as it's stretched, it gets thinner and thinner. And this guy is aptly called the lens because that's what it does. It actually focuses light that comes in through here, and it makes sure that it gets exactly to the right distance to hit on the retina there. Unfortunately, the cells in the lens start to harden up a little bit as you get older, about 35, so I'm kind of past that. And then you start losing some resolution. You can get a lensectomy. They can replace them. It's a fairly easy little non-invasive surgery these days. My father-in-law had both of his done, and he says it was great. His vision is wonderful again. Let's go to the third layer. And the third layer we're going to do here is the nervous tunica. Let's get another color here. And it's not called nervous because it's nervous. It's called nervous because it's got nerves in it and so forth. And that's primarily the retina, which is really an important part of the eye. So let's take a look here. Nothing in the front. So the retina would be all of this in the back here, right? Now, the retina is composed of the photoreceptors. The photoreceptors are rods and cones. What's the difference between the two of them? Rods are for black and white, cones are for color. And typically it works something like this. Most of your color cones are probably in the center of it, and most of your rods are off to the periphery, which is why peripheral vision tends to be more black and white. And if I was an animal who didn't have a whole bunch of cones, if I had all rods, I'd probably have great night vision, but not very good color vision. Hey, there's two interesting parts here of the retina, and one of them is, of course, back here, where the optic nerve comes in. That's actually called the blind spot. And it actually comes in and then it attaches on this side of the retina. So because it comes in like that, there can be no rods and cones right here, so it's a blind spot. We'll do a little activity later on to find that. There are some animals, like I think squids and octopus, who actually have optic nerves that come in and make contact right here on the back. So they don't disturb the retina at all, and they have no blind spot, which is really interesting. There's another interesting place on the retina, which is right here. It's just a little pit there. That is where you have your highest concentration of cones. That's called the fovea centralis. Okay, so that is pretty much the anatomy of the eye. We've gone through this part here. Why doesn't the eye collapse on itself? And the reason is it's actually filled with fluids, which are called humors, right? And there are two large chambers in the eye that keep things kind of puffed up so they don't collapse. The first one, let's see if we have an interesting color here. First one is right here. So what fills in between the lens and the cornea? This is the anterior chamber, and it's filled with a fluid which is called the aqueous humor. And it's very clear. And the reason why you have to have clear fluid in there is because if you had blood in there to serve nutrients and oxygen and so forth, you'd have a lot of trouble seeing because the world would all look red to you. And then in the back of the eye, this is called the posterior chamber, all in here. Imagine this is a big ball, three-dimensional. And the posterior chamber is actually filled with another fluid, which is called vitreous humor. And vitreous humor is, it's almost semi-solid. It's really just a big piece of goopy, I don't know what to call it. But when we do a dissection, you'll see it all spill out together. And so it keeps everything, the retina, from falling apart, and it also causes light as it comes in not to be refracted, to be tightened up. A lot of times when you have trouble with that, you can have issues where if it's not pushing really well against the retina can actually become detached, and little pieces of the retina can actually kind of float out here into it. And that's when you get kind of funny focusing of light, or what we call floaters. My brother-in-law has these, for example, and he says all the time he's seeing sparks and so forth. You can try and fix it with laser surgery, but it's kind of a hit or miss situation. Okay, so the retina is made of two layers, rods and cones, and they're connected to the optic nerve by something called bipolar neurons. This is really the only place within the body where we see neurons which are bipolar. Interesting shape there. We talked about another area of the retina, which is called the fovea centralis, and that's where rods are most concentrated, so we have fantastic resolution there. And we also talked about how the one place you can't see in the retina is where the optic nerve comes in, and this, of course, is called the blind spot. Okay, let's talk about some problems we have with the eye here. So the most common one is nearsightedness and farsightedness, myopia or hyperopia. Now, I always get these mixed up. Think about it like this way. If you are nearsighted, it means you see things best when they're close up. So a nearsighted person would not have trouble reading, but would have trouble seeing things on the board across the room. I tend to be farsighted, hyperopia. In other words, I can see things really clear across the room. I can see that insect crawling on the wall, no problem. I can read an eye chart, no problem. But I have a lot of trouble reading books. I have to kind of hold books far away. What's going on there? Well, usually it has to do with a problem with the retina here. And excuse me, did I say retina? I mean lens. And what's going on is that the lens is no longer focusing light exactly where it should be. So it wants to focus it exactly at that distance on the retina. What happens if it focuses it, what if we focused it, let me see if I draw a little picture like this. So what if you focused it and it just landed here instead of back here? So what would you do? Well, you would remove something you would remove something closer to you. So if I brought it closer into me, what would happen is that it would then push the image further back here so it hit the retina. What if you focused an image and it went too far back there? Well, you would then pull the object farther away from you so it would go like that, back there. So if I have to pull something farther away from me, it's because the image went too far back. That tells you the difference between myopia and hyperopia. Let's take a look at another disorder here. Another disorder is simply what we call acuity. That's the simple eye test. You're supposed to stand at 20 feet there, and you should be able to see things as if you were at 20 feet. What if you're only able to read up to this line right here? You're standing at 20 feet, but it seems to you as if you were standing at 50 feet. In other words, you got to come a lot closer to see things that normal vision would have. So you have 20/50 vision. This is called the Snellen test. Cataracts. As I mentioned before, unfortunately, as you get older and older, your lenses stop focusing because the cells don't regenerate. They harden up. You can get a transplant if you want, or you could just use glasses, I suppose. Then there's astigmatism. So in front of the eye was that nice cornea, right? That clear part here. And it should be perfectly round and smooth. Sometimes, though, you get some bumps in there, right? So you would see some images badly and some okay. You have a strange shaped cornea, and you can again get that fixed up with glasses. And the last one I want to talk about is very common in males. This is a genetic. I think it's about 20% of males all have some sort of color blindness. This is called the Ishihara test, and it has to do with genes, and it's mostly red-green color that we have the problem with.